Hello, welcome. This is Dr. Court Lewis, and I'm here discussing my book, The Real Meaning of Doctor Who by Open Universe, available on any good online retailers and hopefully in stores. And you can also follow me on Facebook under Cortland D. Lewis, but also Doctor Who and Philosophy. And I do have a blog, which is cortlandlewis.wordpress.com. So anyway, this is a series of lectures, videos, however you want to call them, where I discuss the book and its purpose and meaning. So let's first talk about Doctor Who. Maybe you don't know who Doctor Who and you're just happening upon this. Well, Doctor Who is a TV franchise that started in 1963. Its main character is a time-traveling alien. Some of the neat features about him or her is that the Doctor has two hearts and a time machine that is bigger on the inside. It's often in the shape of a police box, which was famous in Britain for a long time as sort of a way to contact the police, but also it contained things that the police might use in, say, traffic control or in terms of accidents. So wheels, tires, ropes, etc. It's called, that little box that he travels in is called the TARDIS, which is time and relative dimensions in space. It's bigger on the inside. I believe I've already mentioned that. And that becomes one of many intriguing things that occurred in the 1960s with the help of producer Verity Lambert, who helped bring the show to life. And one reason, the Doctor Who has stayed around is because it's so imaginative and unique. And that's also the reason why it serves to be the first book in Open Universe's The Real Meaning and Philosophy series. I'm sorry, The Real Meaning in Popular Culture series, where they look at really cultural icons that transcend, these sort of flash in the pan, quick things that people latch on to, that they're really focusing on these big things like Doctor Who and Star Trek and others to show how some popular culture, when it's as massive as things like Doctor Who, it actually serves to frame and shape our reality. And so in order to understand our reality, we need to examine the pop culture theme. And so that's what I do in this book, in an earlier version of the book, it mainly focused on philosophical lessons for life. And this book expands those themes to incorporate how it actually provides a narrative or an understanding of reality. So Doctor Who, right? I mean, it's full of time travel concepts, it's full of ethics, it's full of religion, it's full of history, it's full of many different things that excite the imagination. It's clever, and it was fairly consistent in terms of its canon for the first 35, 40 years. Now, it did go off the air on television in 1989. There was a brief hiatus in the mid-'80s, but it ended its run in '89. It was then picked up in books, lots of new adventure books, and eventually, they had lots of TV specials. Eventually, they had a TV movie with the Eighth Doctor, and that spanned a whole new series of books, which is incredible. It's actually what I'm working through on my blog, where I post about each book in the series as I go through them. It was returned in the late 90s as Big Finish Audios began to revisit some of the classic Doctors, the Doctors 1st through 8, and eventually returned to the television in 2005, eventually becoming a worldwide phenomena again, as it was in the early to mid 60s. It continues to be aired today. It's gone through a lot of changes, and as you can imagine, anything that's now been on the air for almost 20 years, you have some people who think it continues to be great and others who think it needs to be better. Regardless of that, it still provides an intriguing insight into issues of ethics and to issues of knowledge and to time travel and all sorts of things. It's still a great show. I love it. I think I always will love it. So in terms of the book, right, I've already mentioned that the book's designed to explain how Doctor Who influences our understanding of reality. It helps us adapt and understand concepts like evil and good and monster. It helps us understand how we should act in certain situations, what it means to be ethical. And so it's constantly challenging us to think and to consider what happens when we encounter such aliens in our own life. Sure, we're not going to encounter a Santaran or an ice warrior. Well, hopefully we won't, but we will encounter people who are analogous to those things, right? People who are strange, who are different, who might be more aggressive or violent, that have a different idea of what's right and wrong. Maybe it's a different political party or different religion. And we're going to encounter people who are different from us, and who don't want to just sit around and talk and figure out how to be friends, right? They're going to be hateful and they're going to want to destroy. Maybe you have some of those tendencies, right? So the Doctor provides a means of engaging with ourselves, but also engaging with others. And so that's where I want to begin this book, right? With trying to help you understand that and really help you understand how is it that the Doctor engages life. So in chapter 1 of the book, right, I talk about how does the Doctor engage in life? And the concept that I latch onto, and this is a concept I discovered around, I guess, 2007, when I was beginning to really write about Doctor Who and present at conventions dealing with topics of Doctor Who. And it's this concept of a flaneur. Now, I'm not French. I don't know the correct pronunciation. So if I am mispronouncing that, I apologize. But anyway, a flaneur is a traveler who gets lost. Instead of following the prescribed thing to do, the events, the schedule that you might get in, say, a travel book or from a travel agency, or as my grandparents used to love to go on those bus trips that would take you to places, and they would say, okay, you have an hour to do this, and then you get back on and we're going to go somewhere else. Instead of being a traveler who sticks to a strict regiment of what one should do, a flaneur gets lost, right? A flaneur opens oneself to engage the world in a way that might seem scary. It might be counterintuitive. It will lead to surprise. It can lead to bad things, right? But ultimately, what the Doctor shows us is that by living this life as a flaneur, as kind of a engaged, lost wanderer, we open ourselves to live a life that flourishes in ways that we might think unimaginable. So getting lost is typically something that happens when we don't mean it, right? We're on a path through the woods, and the next thing you know, we stepped off the path, or we're driving around in a big city or through the country, and we think we're going one way, but then all of a sudden everything looks different. The GPS stops, and all of a sudden we have no idea where we are at. That's how we typically think of getting lost. That's not a flaneur, right? A flaneur is one who sets out to say, I want to get lost. I'm going to turn the GPS off. I'm going to purposely take a route that's not on the trail. Now, this is not something you can do and not be somewhat prepared for, right? You don't want to just say, hey, I'm in the desert, let me head off in this really sandy spot, and I won't bring any water or any supplies. I'll just go out and, well, you're going to die probably, right? Unless you've got some really good survivor skills. No, a flaneur spends time understanding, how to survive, but also, how to navigate. As for me, I'm blessed with a really good sense of direction. And so for me, getting lost is really just a short period between me being found, right? I typically know where I'm at wherever I go. And I have sort of and maybe, right, you might, if you read this chapter and you're just like, this is just hogwash, right? I love that. If this is just hogwash, then right? Maybe you lack some of those features, right? Some of those features that, you don't mind just being lost, right? Being lost is good, right? Um, maybe you lack that good sense of direction to help you find your way out of places. Being a flaneur is going to be something different. It doesn't mean you can't be a flaneur, but you're going to be something different. But a flaneur is somebody who's taking that time to know, do I have a good sense of direction? Can I survive in this situation? What can I expect? Am I prepared for what I can expect in this situation? But then it's this purposeful, I'm going to go out there and get lost, and I'm going to experience things that I would have never imagined possible. And so my life is full of these adventures that I've gone on both in America. I've been lucky enough to travel abroad to places like the Czech Republic and Prague, Vienna, Munich, and some other places in between. I've spent a lot of time down in New Orleans, one of my favorite cities. Of course, I live out in Knoxville, so you've got the mountains and lots of outdoor activities there. And of course, driving, right? I love to drive. At some point when I was a teenager, I actually took the radio out of my car and I just carried a harmonica with me, and I drove around the backwoods of Mississippi, never knowing where I was going, just knowing eventually I would show up somewhere and I could find my way home. And so I've met people who claim to be werewolves. I've met really interesting people who could explain the meaning of life. I've gone to festivals where I was the only one who's speaking English, right? So I couldn't communicate with others. I've danced. I've gotten on stage with Bob Dylan a couple times. I've gotten kicked out of a Kiss concert. I've done a lot of stuff. Spent the night on the jail floor, right? Not a fun time, but it was a time where I found myself lost. And so instead of freaking out and trying to just panic and get out of there, there's this nice embrace of life. And this is what the doctor shows us, right? It's that life is about this purposeful exploration. Whether that's getting out and driving, whether that is getting lost in the woods or a big city, or even if you do this at home, right? You can do this with a good book. You can do this with projects, whether it's music, art, computer programming, crafts and hobbies. It's about finding yourself in order to explore the world, in order to realize you don't know yourself, so you can find out more about yourself, so you can find out more about the world, right? It's just this constant growth and experimentation. And that, right, that is the lesson that I see the doctor teaching from very early on to 2000, I'd say, from the beginning, 1963, all the way to 2022 and beyond, right? The doctor's willingness to get lost, to look silly, to be made fun of, to get in trouble, to have adventures, to be lost, right? That willingness that the ninth doctor says, yeah, when you go, I think, and I'll probably butcher this, but when you go to France, right, you throw away the tour book, you get lost, you act silly, you kiss a stranger, right? That is the life that the doctor is telling us. That's the life of a flaneur. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's scary. But for me, that's the motive of the doctor. To me, that's the motive and the means to live a flourishing life. And so I want to wrap up and stop here and say that as you think about your life, have you been a flaneur? Are you scared of being a flaneur? What's something in your life you could take that first or second step of getting lost? Right? Be prepared, but be open. Be open to what you might encounter, because it's often that sort of stuff that will change your life. It will stick with you, and it will help you lead a life that is flourishing. So the next lecture is going to move into the dangers of being a flaneur, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, being a flaneur is great, but as we see, the doctor gets into dangers, gets into trouble, dies from time to time. us living a life of a flaneur involves some of the same dangers. So the next lecture, we're going to look at some of those dangers of being a flaneur.